Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Today is episode 9 of A through Z of Haunted America, a series where we explore the strange, eerie, and mysterious corners of America. Florida exists in between. It's a place where the land never feels finished, where water presses up through cracks, where the ground can give way without warning. Swamps stretch further than the eye can follow. Sinkholes open like mouths. Coastlines run on forever, blurring where the state ends and something older begins. On the surface, it's beautiful. Sunlight on water, palm trees moving in warm wind, bright colors that almost feel unreal. But stay long enough, and you notice the rot beneath it. Heat that doesn't just surround you, it settles into your body. Isolation that creeps in, even when you're not alone. The sense that the landscape is watching, waiting, patient. In Florida, the strange doesn't hide in attics or abandoned buildings. It wanders openly. It moves through tall grass. It stands just inside the tree line. It flips back into the water the moment you try to look directly at it. People here don't always see things clearly, just impressions. A shape where no shape should be. A sound that doesn't repeat. A presence felt for seconds and remembered forever. These are not stories of what stayed. They're stories of what passed through. Things seen briefly and then gone. Long before Florida became a headline for the strange, people in the swamps were already seeing something they couldn't explain. They didn't call it a monster. They didn't even give it a name at first. They just described what crossed the trail ahead of them and then vanished. Reports of the skunk ape stretch back to the early 1900s, clustered deep in places where most people don't go willingly. The edges of the Everglades, the flooded backcountry of Big Cypress Swamp, areas where the ground never fully dries and the trees grow close enough to block out sound. Witnesses tend to agree on the basics. It's tall, broad through the shoulders, covered in reddish-brown hair that looks matted, almost wet. But what people remember most isn't what they saw, it's what they smelled. A heavy sulfur-like odor, something rotten, something animal, but wrong. The smell often comes first, a warning without context, then movement. A shape shifting through tall grass, taller than a person should be, able to disappear into it. And then, nothing. No crash. No retreating footsteps. No sound at all. That silence unsettles people more than the sighting itself. Hunters describe freezing in place, suddenly aware of how loud their own breathing sounds. Airboat operators talk about engines cutting out at the worst moment, the smell still hanging thick in the air. Hikers report feeling that they're being pace matched, step for step, before this sensation abruptly stops. The skunk ape is almost always seen near water, canals, marsh edges, shallow flooded trails, places where reflections distort shapes and distance loses meaning. And when it leaves, it doesn't flee. It simply steps off the path and dissolves into the swamp, as if the land opens to receive it. There are photographs, there are videos, but they're never very clear. Always too far, too grainy, too obscured by brush or heat shimmer. That's where the skepticism comes in. How can something that large exist without proof? The answer may be simpler and more unsettling than it sounds. The swamp is a perfect eraser. Footprints fill with water within seconds. Hair washes away. Sounds are swallowed by insects, wind, and distance. Visibility changes by the minute. Even experienced trackers admit the Everglades don't behave like normal terrain. Paths vanish, land shifts. Where there was solid ground an hour ago, it might not exist there anymore. If something wanted to stay hidden, this is where it would live. Some researchers suggest misidentified bears or escaped apes. Others argue hoaxes. But none of those explanations account for the consistency. The same posture, the same smell, the same quiet exit, reported by people who had nothing to gain by telling their story. Many of them even waited years, some even decades. And nearly all of them end the same way. They don't claim to know what the skunk ape is. They only say they know what it isn't. It isn't human. It isn't a shadow. And it isn't something imagination alone could produce. In Florida, the land doesn't just hide things, it absorbs them. And every so often, it gives one back, just long enough to be seen, before taking it again. There's a town in central Florida where belief isn't whispered. It's posted on signs, printed on maps, spoken openly about. Cassadaga calls itself the psychic capital of the world. People come here looking for answers, mediums, readings, messages from the other side. The town itself feels suspended. Quiet streets, old houses, an air of polite reverence, like everyone is careful not to disturb something listening. But the story most people come for is the one hidden in the woods, not far from town, beyond marked paths and casual foot traffic, sits what the locals call the Devil's Chair. It isn't ornate, it isn't dramatic, just a brick chair, half swallowed by trees and brush, as if it grew there, or was left behind and never reclaimed. Offerings appear overnight. Cigarettes, alcohol, coins, small objects with no explanation. People say if you leave something after dark, it'll be gone by morning. Not stolen, not scattered, simply taken. And if you sit in the chair, especially at night, something notices. Witnesses talk about whispers that don't form words. Sounds close enough to feel intentional. Scratches in the dirt nearby, even when there's no animals around. The sudden awareness of movement just outside your line of sight. Almost everyone mentions the same physical reaction: a pressure in the chest, a wave of nausea, panic without cause. Not fear of the chair itself, but fear of staying. Some describe the feeling of being watched so intensely they can't turn their head. Others say they feel a hand on their shoulder that vanishes when they react. A few claim they've heard their name spoken softly, close enough to feel breath. Skeptics say it's suggestion, that Kasadaga primes the mind, that expectation does the work. And maybe that's part of it, but that explanation doesn't fully settle the question. Because people who don't know the legend report the same sensations, the same sudden urge to leave, the same certainty that sitting there too long would be a mistake. The chair doesn't chase. It doesn't threaten. It waits. Which raises the harder question: is the power in the object itself or in the belief? Kasadaga exists because people believe communication is possible. The devil's chair exists because people expect something to answer. Over time, those expectations pile up. Fear layered over curiosity. Curiosity layered over ritual. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of people approaching the same spot with the same charged thoughts. What happens when a place absorbs all of that? At some point, the line between imagination and experience begins to blur. Not because nothing is happening, but because something is. And no one can agree on what gave it permission. Some locals refuse to go near the chair. Others say it's harmless until you linger. A few insist it's not a chair at all, but what was already in the woods long before it was built. In Kasadaga, belief is currency. Attention is fuel. And when too many people expect something to be there, sometimes something steps forward to meet them. South of Miami, hidden in plain sight, stands something that should never exist the way it does. Coral Castle doesn't announce itself as a mystery. There are no warning signs, no dramatic framing, just stone, cut, stacked, balanced, with the precision that feels deliberate, in a way modern tools struggle to replicate. It was built by one man. Edward Leeds Calnin arrived in Florida in the early 1900s. Small in stature, sickly by most accounts, and deeply private. He worked alone, always alone. No crews, no machinery anyone could remember seeing. And yet, block by block, he raised a structure made of coral limestone, some pieces weighing several tons. There were no witnesses to the construction, not one reliable account of how the stones were moved, lifted, or set into place. Neighbors claimed the work happened at night, that they heard no engines, no shouting, no metal striking stone. only the occasional dull scrape followed by silence. By daylight, something new would be standing where nothing had been before. A wall, a tower, a gate that could be pushed open with a finger, yet weighed as much as a small truck. Leeds Cullinan never explained his methods. When asked, he gave cryptic answers. He hinted that he understood the same principles used to build the pyramids, that ancient civilizations knew something modern engineering had forgotten. That suggestion alone was enough to set imaginations on fire. Some believe he discovered a form of anti-gravity. Others claim he understood geomagnetic forces, sound resonance, or a lost mathematical truth tied to the earth itself. A few go further, suggesting the stones were never lifted at all, but persuaded. What makes Coral Castle unsettling isn't speculation. It's proof. The stones are real. The weights are documented. The man was real. And the timeline doesn't make sense. Even today, engineers debate how certain pieces were positioned with such accuracy, using only the tools Leeds Cullinan is known to have owned. Replicating the work would require cranes, generators, teams of specialists, and months of planning. He did it quietly, patiently, out of sight. When Edward Leeds Cullinan died, he took his knowledge with him. No notes explaining technique, no diagrams, no confession. Just a structure that refuses to fully explain itself. That's where Coral Castle shifts from curiosity to something deeper, because it forces an uncomfortable realization. Sometimes the mystery isn't whether something is supernatural, it's whether our understanding is incomplete. Coral Castle exists in that gap. The space between what we know and what we can prove. It stands as a reminder that human capability may not be as limited as we think, or that something else occasionally lends a hand. In Florida, with its porous ground and quiet secrets, was the perfect place for such a thing to rise. You can walk through Coral Castle today, touch the stone, measure the walls, watch the gate move, and still walk away with the same question everyone else has carried for a century. Not what happened here, but how. Florida just isn't surrounded by water. It's positioned at the edge of something. One corner of the Bermuda Triangle reaches Florida's coast, where the Atlantic feels less like a boundary and more like an invitation. One that doesn't always let things come back. For decades, ships and planes have vanished along these waters. Not wrecked, not partially recovered, just gone. Small boats that never reached port. Aircraft that stopped responding mid-flight. Entire crews erased without distress calls, debris fields, or explanation. Patterns emerge quickly. Compasses spinning without settling. Navigation instruments contradicting each other. Clear skies collapsing into sudden, violent storms. And then, radio silence. Not a fading signal, not a final word. Silence that arrives all at once. Florida's proximity matters. Many of these disappearances begin or end here. Flights departing from Florida that never arrive. Boats leaving the coast that don't return. The state becomes a threshold. 1 foot on land, 1 foot over something vast and indifferent. Skeptics argue natural explanations. Magnetic anomalies that interfere with the navigation. The Gulf Stream moving faster and stronger than expected, carrying debris far from search zones. Human error compounded by unpredictable weather. All of that is possible, but possibility doesn't erase pattern. Pilots have reported moments where time felt wrong, minutes missing from logs, fuel calculations that didn't add up. Sailors describe seas that looked normal until they weren't, waves forming from nowhere, horizons bending in ways that made distance impossible to judge. Then there are the theories that refuse to stay buried. Time slips. Pockets where past and present overlap. Underwater structures, vast, artificial shapes detected by sonar and dismissed just as quickly. The idea that something beneath the surface disrupts more than currents, that it bends navigation and perception. And the ocean offers no correction. Search crews comb these waters and find nothing. No oil slicks, no floating cargo, no fragments large enough to confirm impact. It's as if the sea doesn't scatter what it takes. It closes around it. Florida's waters feel especially hungry because they are shallow enough to seem safe until they're not. The continental shelf drops abruptly. Familiar blues darken fast. What looks navigable can become bottomless without warning. And once something crosses that invisible line, retrieval becomes suggestion rather than certainty. The ocean doesn't owe explanations. It doesn't return what it consumes. It doesn't mark where it fed. It simply keeps moving. That may be the most unsettling truth behind the Bermuda Triangle. Not that something unnatural is happening, but that the sea is operating exactly as it always has. Vast, unbothered, fully capable of erasing evidence without effort. Florida sits at its edge, watching departures more than arrivals. And every disappearance leaves behind the same unanswered question. Not whether the triangle is real, but why it still feels active. Why even now, with satellites and tracking systems and constant surveillance, things still slip through. Because some places don't need secrecy to remain mysterious. They just need depth. Florida is a place where nothing feels permanent. The land sinks, the water rises, shorelines redraw themselves without asking permission. What was solid yesterday can be gone tomorrow, quietly, without ceremony. Swamps swallow footprints before they cool. Sinkholes erase buildings in minutes. The ocean closes over wreckage as if it was never disturbed. Even stone, cut, lifted, arranged by human hands, stands here without fully giving up its secrets. And Florida, Disappearance doesn't look dramatic. It looks ordinary. A shape steps off a trail and doesn't return. A chair sits waiting in the woods, collecting expectations. A castle stands complete without witnesses. A plane leaves the coast and never arrives. No alarms, no explanations, just absence. And yet, nothing here ever truly feels gone. The skunk ape doesn't need proof to remain present. Casadaga doesn't need answers to keep drawing belief. Coral Castle doesn't collapse under skepticism. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't announce itself. It simply continues. Florida holds its mysteries the same way it holds its water. Just below the surface. Visible only if you're looking from the right angle. This is a state built on thresholds. Land and sea. Seen and unseen. Known and suspected. And once something crosses that line, Florida doesn't chase it. It waits. Because in Florida, nothing is ever truly lost. It just waits where you can't see it. If you have a Florida story of your own, something you saw once and never again, this is where it belongs. Encounters in the swamps, figures on back roads that didn't move like people should, something pacing your boat just beneath the water's surface, a moment that still doesn't sit right, no matter how much time has passed. You don't need proof. You don't need answers. Just the memory. You can submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.